line managers, and more importantly, the employee. He has over 20 years experience in HR technology and the HR transformation arena, working on both sides of the fence in consulting. So he's worked in consulting and he's also worked in the corporate. So he's able to marry both worlds. He has deep experience in HR strategy and systems design, selection and implementation to HR transformation, benchmarking, and people analytics. His deep understanding of a wide range of enabling technologies allow him to be able to craft these solutions into value-adding strategic tools that drive the organizations forward. His experience in HR technology and strategic HR transformation means that he can craft a balanced and business-focused answer to business challenges. So without further ado, I'd like everyone to join me as I welcome the first facilitator for today, Lyle Cooper. Good morning, Lyle.
Morning, everybody. It's very weird to come into a conversation like this where you want to interact with people and there's no like face to face. But anyway, I'm very, very glad to be here and to be talking. Should I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Let me do that. Hang on a second. Sorry, I have the wrong screen up. Let me redo. Here we go. All right, has my screen come through?
Yes, it has.
Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. I was listening to the preamble and the conversation about VUCA, and I was busy ticking off all of the trains that I was going to talk about. So actually, I've got nothing left to say. So thank you. No, I'm joking. Yes. So I thank you for having me. As was said, I've been in the HR technology game for over 20 years on both sides of the fence. I started my life as a PeopleSoft implementation consultant and worked on the technical side of technology implementations, PeopleSoft HR, a long time ago. And I moved over eventually in my consulting career into human capital consulting, which is focusing primarily on HR transformation and that area of kind of HR enablement, always with a particular focus on how technology can be applied to support HR in their delivery of service to organizations. I've also spent quite a bit of time in the corporate world. I've worked for large banks. I've worked for a large food producer, the largest, I think, FMCG food producer in Africa. And in those organizations, my role was primarily around owning and shepherding the overall HR technology stack. So rather than looking at a single application, I would be looking at how all of these tools interact with each other, and obviously aligning very closely with colleagues in IT to bring these things to fruition. So I'm very passionate about HR technology. I'm very passionate about technology in general, but I'm not a zealot. I'm not a technology solves every problem in the world kind of a person. In some instances, clever technology is not the best answer to a problem that faces an organization. And I think that figuring out that answer is the question that faces most of us at one time or another. Vendors love to come and talk to us about the next best thing, and we have to keep our heads and make sure that the tools we're buying help us move our strategic intent forward, and that our strategic intent aligns with the intention of the broader organization. So that kind of golden thread from organizational strategy to HR technology absolutely has to exist at all times. So I'm going to talk today about a number of trends. I said there are a great number of macro trends in the world. We can't really cover all of them, so I've had to narrow my focus down for the 45 minutes I have at my disposal. So I wanted to look at these 4 trends. So these are ones that I believe are fairly topical, but also are having a very direct impact on technology, and then ultimately on HR technology, and for us on the African continent. So the first one is around technology innovation. And obviously, this is one that we have to talk about if we're going to talk about HR technology. They are almost one and the same thing. But innovation and change in the technology space, it continues at a speed that is barely comprehensible by a single individual. It's rushing off in every direction of human inquiry. We see applications of technology across all sectors, from the use of AI-driven drones to deliver targeted insecticides to crops rather than indiscriminate spraying by airplanes or by people with spraying devices on their backs, and all the way through to autonomous, or at least semi-autonomous keyhole surgeries, where people are being operated on by a robot through a tiny hole in your abdomen or other part of your body. And these changes are, I'm constantly in awe. Wake up every morning, and it's almost every morning there's a new thing that has been developed or delivered in the world. I read this morning, for example, that they believe that they've discovered the role that DNA plays in the management of traumatic memory. So we'll see we'll see where that goes. Maybe we can edit away some of our bad breakups from when we were children. And what is unique in the technology space, in many ways, is HR is a leading force, particularly in the development of cloud solutions. It was one of the first business operations to be moved to the cloud, and is often trailed by a number of years by the finance capability. Many kind of analysts do not believe that the world is ready for a fully SaaS-enabled finance capability. And I think anybody who's lived through a Hyperion implementation will attest to the difficulty of doing that. And it's no surprise to me that the founders of Workday, who incidentally were the founders of PeopleSoft, where I started my life, started their company as an HR only solution. They didn't look outside of the HR function for delivery of cloud capability. And it's only very recently that they've introduced a comprehensive finance capability. So I think HR technology innovation is a massive driving force in the world, and as a macro trend across the globe. The second topic we cannot avoid in any conversation, probably for the next 3 to 5 years, is the impact of COVID and the challenges that it has brought to the organizations and to the world in general. And the virus was first spotted in 2019, as we all remember, and it was classified as a pandemic in early 2020. But it's brought immense changes on our world, and some of these impacts will be with us for a lot longer than the original danger of the virus itself. COVID has shown us that remote working is possible. This is something that was probably previously considered a myth by people who love technology a little bit too much. But it has also shown us that our global supply chain is not as robust as we would like to believe. And I think most importantly for us on this call, the importance of the health of our employees, not just from a human perspective, but also from a strategic perspective. The health of our workers and our ability for individuals in the organization to be able to do their work. As obvious as it seems to say it, has really dawned in the last few years as a critical input into strategic planning. COVID also has and continues to have, excuse me, a significant impact on all of our lives. If for those of you who have young children, there's an entire cohort of children who have grown up or have spent a large portion of their formative years barely seeing the faces of strangers. And the impact that these restrictions and others that have been placed on children will have an ongoing impact for early childhood development and school readiness. And we will feel in HR the impact of this 15, 20 years down the line. So COVID's a definite macro trend that has the potential to drive change in the organizations for a long time. The Great Resignation is the next one. And obviously for many of us on the African continent, it's specifically felt in South Africa, but I'm assuming it is, or not assuming, I know it is prevalent in other parts of the continent, is that the Great Resignation is coupled with the Great Emigration. We're not only losing people from our organizations individually, but also from our continent, as international organizations seek the skills we hold, or we seek to find a place in the world that we might consider slightly safer, especially in light of our experiences over the past 2 years. South Africa in particular had a real challenge around the delivery. I think that put a fear into people that maybe this place isn't as safe as they would like it, and there might be better places for them to move. The slow lifting of global lockdowns and a return to a normal mode of working has brought about a significant uptick in people who are changing for whom and where they work. Two things have become clear. Where you work is not as material to your job or your productivity as we used to think. Innovation is another story. There are studies that show that innovation decreases in a virtual space. And I know there are a number of studies that are ongoing in this regard. But this, of course, is also highly dependent on the work you do. A plumber cannot work from home. There are classes of vital workers and sectors in the organization that are not suitable to virtual work. And the second item is the care shown to you by your employer is a critical component in the employment relationship. No one wants to protect their employees. And that has been thrown into sharp contrast over the past 2 years by organizations' responses to the real threats or perceived concerns of employees. And then the final piece for me is economic turmoil. So the global economy has been thrown a number of curveballs over the past 2 years. We know as a result of COVID that demand for some products, petrol, for example, has plummeted, mainly due to the fact that no one is commuting to work or wasn't commuting to work for large periods of time. But others have shown a sharp increase. Think about all of the items you had to purchase to operate from home, whether that was a coffee machine or a Wi-Fi router. There's been a significant uptick in those classes of technologies. And challenges on the geopolitical front have also exacerbated this turbulence, and the fallout from Ukraine is absolutely going to impact on global markets for years. We are going to feel this pain for a long time. So if we dig a little bit deeper, we find that there are, below these major macro trends, there are a number of more specific trends that relate closer to our area of conversation this morning. And I think the first one I want to start looking at as we class them around the technology innovation is this grouping of let's call them trends. And the first being AI and machine learning. This has been a trend for quite a while, but its abilities continue to grow. And the capacity for this technology to understand and automate processes and decision-making are breathtaking. And again, every week we see something new developed in this space. From I've been following a gentleman on LinkedIn for a while who has developed a tool that will automatically generate job descriptions for you based on a review, an AI-driven review of job descriptions available across the open internet. But caution has to be exercised. There's a lot of breathless excitement around artificial intelligence, but these are not tools that can cure any and all problems. They bring with them their own set of requirements, and they require careful design, careful deployment, and ongoing curation. And above all, they require significant volumes of data, significant volumes of clean, normalized data that is often not available in many organizations, particularly around the HR space. Collaboration tools. If we think where we were just 5 years ago, the ability to work on a document simultaneously at the same time as our colleagues was something that very few of us had considered doing, and even fewer of us had even tried. And the ability to create a document repository for a specific term, for a specific team was absolutely unheard of, especially without IT's help. If you wanted to create a project folder, you would have to get someone to create one for you on your network and then make sure that all the permissions were created. You can do that now with about 5 clicks on Microsoft Teams or Slack or whichever is your natural workspace of choice in your organization. And for me, one of the most interesting impacts of collaboration tools is the ability to have a meeting while at the same time having back channel conversations with colleagues in the meeting about the content of the meeting, allowing for coordination of responses to queries or a checking of a fact as the process or as the meeting unfolds. I find that a fascinating impact on the HR component around the way organizations operate. If we, the final piece there is around edge computing, which is another trend that will have a massive impact on our world of work. And edge computing is really about the bringing of computational activities closer to the source. So 15 years ago, everything sat, or 20 years ago, everything sat in the basement of a large organization on the mainframe. Then 10 years ago, everything sat on top, on your laptop or your desktop machine. 5 years ago, the majority of your computational activities were moved out to the cloud. Now they're starting to bring it a little bit closer. And what that means for us in Africa is the ability to drive really heavy calculations and computationally intensive activities like AI or predictive analytics without the lag that we often experience in traditional cloud. So moving on to the COVID area, we have health concerns have obviously become a primary worry for us, and remaining healthy had never been a sharper focus for many of us. The vaccine status of the workforce and our ability to track this, not only for the wellness of staff, but also for statutory reasons, has become a critical concern. We in the consulting industry are faced with this maybe more sharply than many others, where we not only have to track for our own reporting our staff's vaccine status, but we are sometimes required to provide that information or at least confirm information to our clients who may have differing protocols around allowing people to return to work. Which brings me on to the last piece, which is around the safe return to work. Our workplaces have to be spaces where people are safe. And no one should feel unduly marginalized or pressurized. And managing this process of getting people back to the organization's headquarters or offices in general has fallen squarely on the shoulders of HR. And it's something that we will have to continue to manage going forward. If we look at the impact of the Great Resignation, flexible employment, not only in terms of the number of days we spend in an office, which is interesting. It's a process we are going through in EY at the moment, trying to define what is the desired number of days that people are working in an would wish to come into the organization physically to work. But it's around around the need to cater for a broader range of employment relationships. So we have part-time, but now we have part-time remote, part-time hybrid, temporary, gig workers, casual workers. All of these are critical, especially when we want to look at managing the performance of these individuals, as well as ensuring ongoing skills development. The world has moved on from this idea that managing non-traditional employees, growth and development was their own concern. Many organizations are finding it important and indeed a requirement to ensure the training and certification of gig workers and similar kinds of non-permanent employees to be certified to work in their space. Coupled to this, a growing focus on skills rather than traditional competencies. And we see this in tools like Workday, and more recently, we've seen it coming out of the Oracle stable, this idea of using artificial intelligence to analyze a person's career history and describe to them a set of skills rather than a set of competencies. And then using something we're very familiar with in our online lives around people who have these sets of experiences typically have these sets of skills, and people who have these skills, this set of skills typically have this other set of skills. So it allows for an AI, for example, to have a look at my career history and say, somebody who has worked in technology typically has Excel skills. And we find that people who have Excel skills also tend PowerPoint skills. You know, Lyle, can you confirm this? And then to Lyle's manager, there's a third layer which says, we think Lyle should have these skills, Mr. Manager. Please take a look and confirm which of these are appropriate to Lyle. And this can be done fairly quickly without the more intrusive approaches around skills assessments and, well, competency assessments. It's less formal, but it's more fluid, and it does provide the potential for more granular strategic planning. And the global slowdown has also driven home the message to us just how integrated we all are, how our supply chains are very tightly bound together, but are still only as strong as the most vulnerable link. And this, I can't think of a better example to show this than that debacle we had in the Suez Canal, where that gigantic container ship got stuck sideways in the Suez Canal and caused a 3-month follow-on impact on the global supply chain. And it was one event in one part of the world, and it had a direct impact on motor vehicle manufacture in the United States, for example. And it's just, for me, there's no better way to show the interlinking of the world. So if we now come closer to the world of work and why we are all here this morning, these trends, I think, are driving 4 key events in the space of HR technology in particular. So the first one I want to look at on the left-hand side is the concept of low code, no code. And what this is, it's a growing service or functionality that many of our vendors are placing in their technology. And what this is it's an approach to driving a kind of employee or user empowerment, where non-technical users are able to directly interact with and configure their technology or their systems with no formal programming, or in some cases even training required. Many of the modern many of the modern cloud platforms have a version of this, whether it's Forms or Power Automate in Office 365 or ongoing workflow configuration in ServiceNow. These are all tools that we see that allow for a correctly authorized person to make quite significant functional changes to the organization and then release these changes to the broader organization. And this is fantastic in terms of empowering the business, but these tools are not all rose tinted, unfortunately. They still need to be managed, and organizations still need to think about how to deploy this capability to avoid what is being called app sprawl, which is really a proliferation of lots of little point solutions created by individuals that are unsupervised, not maintained, possibly dependent on individuals who might leave the organization without any clear documentation on the tools, and at worst case scenario might actually expose the organization to compliance risks, particularly around the release of sensitive information. But I still believe that this holds a massive potential for any organization, especially where it comes to the ability to change your HR technology space on the fly without any technology downtime, or you'll need to work through IT bureaucracy. But I do believe we need to think about this and how we place strong controls or guardrails around these technologies to make them to make sure that they deliver value to the organization and not just more confusion. So the next item that I want to talk around is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So these are terms that are often used interchangeably, but they do actually represent different approaches to building and automating activities on a computer. But drawing a line between these two, so if there are any purists out there, we can talk about the line between AI and ML in another conversation. Today, I'm just going to treat them as a whole. And I think AI has made some significant splashes in the HR space, most notably in recruiting. Almost every vendor in the recruiting space has a tool, or at least claims to have a tool, that is driven or guided or controlled by some sort of AI capability. And this is often aimed at the desire to enable accurate and appropriate talent selection. However, there's a concept in this space that we need to keep in mind, and it's an idea called the hidden worker syndrome. A paper was released by Harvard Business Review, by one of the other consulting houses, that talks a lot about the impact that AI-driven selection is having on excluding people who don't fit a very narrow definition of an appropriate candidate. And as the world changes very rapidly, this idea of catering for hidden workers is one we really do need to keep our eyes on. Another real concern for us is that we have seen examples in the world where AI tools have found to have bias, and biased against almost every candidate in the recruiting pool who is not a white male with a university degree. And this was not a failing of the tool, but it developed this set of biases out of bad historical data that carried the biases over from the past. AI works out how to drive itself forward and support decisions based on historical data. And if your historical data is tainted with bias, you need to work to remove that. Otherwise, you will just be carrying the sins of the father, so to speak, into the current reality. Also, these tools need careful management and training, as I said earlier. They really are not fire and forget technologies. They need to have constant management. And the idea of transparent or explainable AI is one that is growing, as is the need for organizations to have an AI ethics committee in play to ensure that we do not utilize this incredibly powerful technology either purposefully or by omission to drive bad behavior and unfair practices into the organization. But this does have immense value across the HR, potential value across the HR value chain. And whether this is for understanding workforce attrition and retention dynamics, or to allow us to better manage critical skills, or being able to route requests to approvers based on who's the best person to respond, not just who is the next in line in an organizational hierarchy. These capabilities offer significant opportunity for the HR function. And for us on the African continent, we have to be extra cautious when adopting these tools. we have to understand how they work to ensure that they are correctly attuned to our local challenges and our local contexts. These tools are often developed in the global north, and they are often shown to be lacking or at least wanting in their ability to adapt to local contexts, especially from global vendors of cloud tools that are driven by AI. We have to ensure that we keep a very close eye on how these work, not only from an operational perspective, but also from an ethics and governance consideration as well. Very closely bound to this idea is the concept of personalization. And the ability for, and this relates specifically to the ability for modern employees to engage effectively with their HR tools and their HCM offerings. And the excuse me, the principles around personalization are the ability for individuals and employees to adjust how information is presented to them, and to make sure that they're provided with information where and when they need it in the tool they are using, rather than requiring them to go hunt for information across multiple tools and platforms. So we see this happening quite a lot in the Teams space, where vendors like ServiceNow and obviously Microsoft themselves are allowing employees and individuals to interact with intelligent bots in channel to deliver back to them information they require, whether it's a compa ratio graph around a potential promotion, or the ability to understand where an individual is or where a business process is, without having to leave Teams and log on to an alternative tool. So the ability to drive decisions and processes forward using this ability to personalize tools is massive. And being able to present information to an employee in a manner that suits their work style and relevant to their current role will help drive a frictionless experience for any employee. In the African context, we have to recognize that in many organizations, the concept of an employee-centric design is not one that is easily accepted for many of our organizations, and nor is it often suitable for a company's dominant culture. So again, as with all pieces of technology, we have to take a careful review of this capability and the tools that house it to ensure that it is appropriate for our organizations. If we are working in an organization that is driven by a large unskilled labor force or semi-skilled labor force, whether that is in manufacturing or mining or any of the primary economies of the world, a very slick user interface that requires mobile connectivity might not be appropriate. And there's no point in taking a new system on board into our organizations and then trying to force it to work in the old way. So a careful review of the technologies we have in place is always a requirement. And then the last component on this slide is the idea around workforce analytics. And by this, I'm not just talking about sexy dashboards and predictive analytics, but it's talking about all of the tools that we use and how we consume the data. So many of the tools that have come to the forefront in our post-COVID world, like Teams, SharePoint, Chat, ServiceNow, Office 365, all generate massive plumes of data around each employee, around who they're talking to, who they're in meetings with, how long does it take for them to respond to an approval request, how often and how full are their days with meetings. All of this data is generated by all of these tools and can be collected and made available through a myriad of analytical tools for us to view and review. For me, one of the components of this that I find most exciting is the idea of using a capability called organization network analytics, which takes a look at the informal networks within an organization. Who's talking to whom, when, how well connected is an individual to the rest of the organization? Do we have a key man dependency between our organization and our external vendors or customers? These are all capabilities that allows us to map who knows whom and who is critical in the hub of our social fabric in an organization. Another capability in this space is around the ability to do sentiment analysis. So this is a tool that allows us to analyze the content or the sentiment of the words used within emails, within documents that we're producing, within social media posts, both by our employees and about our organization from customers in the broader world, and allow us to understand just what is the sentiment around our organization. And I think this is of critical importance for us, again, in the HR space, to think very carefully about how we apply these tools and whether we are applying them in a way that is fair to our employees. Is it appropriate for us to analyze the sentiment of employee emails, for example? We have the tool, we have the capability to do it. Should we be doing it? And is it appropriate to our organization's culture? And is it appropriate to our individual country's legislation? And how does that relate? All of these trends for me coalesce around a single key function. And this is around employee engagement. And employee engagement and employee experience is one of the very rare common trends that you will find if you look at a number of the global analysts in our space. So if you read HR trend reports put out by Josh Bersin or by Gartner or by Forrester, they will have a universe of key trends, but the one that almost all of them agree on is the importance of the employee experience. And this revolves around the need to provide employees with a single, direct, easy to use interface in their working experience. And it is perhaps the most important single trend in HR technology. This is more than just building an intuitive interface that allows employees to execute functions without training or hand-holding. It's that it is more than this concept of consumer-grade experience in an organization, that everything should be as easy as Google. This is what we hear often in conversations around employee experience, even though HR is significantly more complicated than typing a search term into a box or clicking on an item that you want to purchase on eBay or any other e-commerce platform. We are, in many ways, from a computer's perspective at any rate, the most and the employee experience encompasses this need to allow employees to engage with their work technology and with their HR function seamlessly and without friction. Employee experience is about removing this friction when dealing with internal administration and allowing employees to get back to the business at hand, whether that business is dealing with a customer or managing the employee performance process or the learning activities of an individual, or indeed from the employee's perspective around finding out just what is our policy on paternity leave or benefits. Employee experience is about supporting a decision point that an employee is faced with or a manager is faced with data and analysis that provides a solid context for this decision. And it allows the individual to make a considered choice or an informed choice, whether that is selecting your medical insurance cover or deciding, as I said, on a potential promotion. And tools such as ServiceNow are leading the charge in this space and are delivering an employee experience layer that covers not only the HR system, but also business processes that span the HR space and drift into IT or finance or facilities. For me, the employee experience is a critical component to any future-proof HR technology strategy for any organization. And particularly for us on the African continent, we our vendors around their preferred our working population on the ground and on the factory floor. Do we need a whiz-bang interface, or do we need to be able to engage with our employees through SMSs, for example? So balancing out the drive by vendors to develop the latest flashy thing against the very real considerations for executing appropriately locally in our organizations is always of critical concern. I was given 40 minutes. I think I'm bang on 40 minutes. I'm happy to take questions for the remainder of my time. While those are coming up, I will leave this up here for everybody to think about. Globally, we spend 3 trillion on digital transformation, and yet we find that 91% of the business processes in an organization have a component of offline management.
Okay, thank you very much, Lyle. It was a very interesting presentation, and I wish you could continue, but unfortunately.
I'm happy to carry on. Stopping me talking is always a difficult thing. So
Yeah,
but I think the others will get cross.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. So we have just a question, which says that how do we address the biases / omissions against qualified candidates when using AI in recruitment? Do you want me to repeat that? Did you get it?
No. So how do we cater for or counter the emissions? Is as I understand it when we're using AI. So I think the most important thing with anything to do with AI in the workplace is to avoid what some people term math washing, which is the assumption that because the computer says so, it must be true. Until we are much further down the road with developing generalized artificial intelligence, every process has to be AI supported, but human governed or human curated or human shepherded. We should always question AI when it produces things, and we should always use and go back and double check. That's the one component. The other component we're seeing is the use of what they call red teaming in artificial intelligence, which is pitting 2 artificial intelligence programs against each other to sense check whether they're delivering what is required. As an aside, if you search for a thing called "this cat is not real," you will find a website that is artificially generated pictures of cats that is then sense checked by another AI to make them more and more realistic. But I think the most important thing in using AI or to counter emissions by AI is as I said, to keep humans in the loop at all times, but also to ensure that our requirements that we are putting into our system are actually bona fide, and that we don't have situations where our job descriptions grow around an individual or grow over time to include requirements that are actually not relevant to the job at hand. Human beings are very good at filtering out non-relevant job requirements. Computers are not that great at it yet.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that response. So we have another question here that says, do you think AI and robots will take up the HR role in the future?
Goodness gracious, I hope not. And not just because it's the space I work in, but also we are a very, very, very long way away from computers being able to replicate anything close to simple human intuition. I think that we will have more and more AI colleagues in the HR space that might support us with finding information or providing or doing heavy duty analysis. But eventually, when dealing with people, we need to have people not only in the loop, but in control. So I don't think so, no.
Fantastic. So I have another question. Question seems to be popping up right now. So Jennifer says, post-COVID, employers are requiring HR leaders to come up with smart policies to track employee performance in the hybrid world plan. Any idea on how HR can track effective performance with the hybrid workplace?
Well, I think there's two approaches to that, and it really does depend on the nature of the work being carried out. So if your employees are primarily knowledge workers, then we should already be managing them on outputs and continue to do so. Focus on the value that people bring or the delivery of outputs or delivery on objectives. If you're looking at call center staff and people in that era or area of the economy, I think the temptation is to introduce quite onerous monitoring tools to make sure that an individual is actually at their desk, and you take pictures with their webcam or you track their keystrokes on their keyboards. I don't think that's the way to go. I think the way to manage those individuals is to make sure that your KPIs and your analytics are focused on the right things, that you're focused again on measurable output of the work. Then the degree of monitoring can come down, and it can be more humane. But I think we need to go back to first principles and look at, how do we define performance in an organization first? How do we define performance for a role and make sure that we're measuring the correct things, not just the easy things?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So we have just enough time to ask one more question. And Lyle is asking, how can HR leaders broach talking to management about investing in HR tech?
we are always at the back of the queue. If I can show one more slide. So this, and particularly these two numbers here, are important in that conversation. HR not only is at the back of the queue for budget, HR is also stuck in spending a lot of our time and our budget on outdated processes. And if we focus on adjusting what we do with our existing budget, we can show the impact of appropriate investment to our business leaders, even if it is just in a small scale. And that ability to show true value from investment should help to set the ball rolling. Big fancy business cases are often not accepted by leaders because they inherently don't believe in measuring of what they call a soft value. But if you can take some time and some energy and really carefully think about reallocating some of your internal budget to a small project and measure that to show the value, I think you have a very strong footing to including larger asks in the budgeting process around HR technology. And we have a lot of those tools available to us in tools like Office 365 that will allow us to do that.
Fantastic, awesome. I'm sure that other people have questions, but we just ran out of time. I even have my own personal questions, but I guess I will engage you personally on that. Quick
Please.
One. Would you be willing to? Will we be getting the slides from you so that we can share with our
Absolutely.
audience? Okay, fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Lyle, thank you very much for taking that time to make this awesome presentation. Really do appreciate your time, and we hope that when next we call upon you, you will oblige us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Next
Thank
year
you
in
very much.
Lagos.
Definitely. All right, cheers.